All right, and we're already recording, which is great. Okay, good to see everybody here. Happy end of February, almost March. Feels like it's been a long time since we did the last community meeting, so I don't know, maybe we should do these more frequently. Good to see Tan's here. I often see him on Slack. Got Sergio and Richard. Welcome, everybody. We'll give folks 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Can everybody see the screen all right? Or the slides? Yeah? All good? Great. Okay. Well, let's get started. Welcome everybody to the February Linkerd community meetup. Thanks for joining. It's good to see all of your faces, especially since I only see your typing in Slack. So as far as we can do face-to-face, this is great. It's going to be a very fun and informative meetup today. I have some news for you, some updates. So let's jump into the agenda slide. Great. Okay. So again, news updates. We've got a lot of fun things to share with you, some new faces. And we're going to have our Linkerd hero from last month, Richard, and one of the questions that I have for him is to teach me how to properly pronounce his last name. So during Tales from the Field, he'll give us his story about how he used Linkerd Await on his project. I'm going to talk a little bit about using protocol detection, what it is, and how it has evolved over the last couple of releases. We will announce a new Linkerd hero, and then if there's time, we'll do some Q&A. So let's jump right in. You'll see we've got a new person here, Jason Morgan. Give us a wave, Jason.
Hey, how's it going, folks? My name is Jason Morgan. I'm a new developer evangelist for the Linkerd project. Really nice to meet all of you. I come to Linkerd by way of VMware, and I'm excited to get to know more about the community and what y'all are doing. So to kick off, I want to talk a little bit about the Community Anchor program, which I hope a lot of y'all are familiar with, but this is really your ability to kind of show off your expertise inside Linkerd and get help telling your story, whether it's in blogs, in conference talks, in meetups, whatever that may be. Right, and we're here to help you, write your articles and get your message out to the broader environment. And if you're looking for more information, you can go here to the Community Anchor page for more details. All right, on top of that, we've got the Linkerd user survey for 2021. It's really important to us and to the community to get a good sense of how you're using Linkerd and why. So if you could take the time to fill it out, we'd all really appreciate it. And if there aren't any questions, or are there any questions before we move on?
I think we can move on.
How do we get to the survey?
Yeah. There's a link right here, and someone's going to put that in the chat right now.
If you scroll back far enough in the announcements channel in the Slack, you'll find it. Or you can type this in. Just simply remember Romeo Bravo Ghost Yankee Uniform 9 Foxtrot Hotel Hotel Sierra.
Simply remember, he says.
Easy peasy.
And William, thank you for the reminder about Slack. We are doing an experiment with the Linkerd community where we're starting a Discord server as well. So we're working on the mechanism for an invite. When I searched for it, I wasn't able to search for the Linkerd server, but we will make sure that an invite gets sent out if it's not already in announcements already. So please join us there if you are interested, and that will help us to see if this experiment's going to work and if it is a better place for community than Slack is. And so with that, I think we're ready to jump into our Linkerd updates. We'll be pretty brief today. Our stalwart Linkerd updater is Oliver. And so I've just got a couple of questions for you, Oliver. First is, how are you doing? How was your month?
Oh man, the months before stable releases are tiring, but we're getting there.
Good, good. So my takeaway there is you being tired means that the release is coming up soon and that we're on track.
That's right. Yeah, we're probably about a week away from getting the stable out, assuming no whammies.
Awesome. And so that means that folks can consider the Edge releases as release candidates?
Yeah, that's right. Today's Edge in particular should be completely feature complete as far as I know. So we've gotten all the big changes we want to get through, and now the next week is just testing in docs and making sure that we've scrubbed every edge of the product and making, know what's coming for everybody.
Gotcha. Awesome. That's very exciting stuff. I know that there are folks in the community who have been waiting for the Opaque Ports feature, which we'll talk about a little bit later today. What can you tell me about the 2.9 series?
So we did a 2.9.3 probably about a month ago-ish. And that was to address two issues. One is around upgrading, especially from 2.8, and preserving all of your configuration, the Linkerd upgrade command. And another was around proxy incompatibilities between 2.8 and 2.9. And so folks who would upgrade to 2.9 would see failed requests between 2.8 proxies, 2.8 clients and 2.9 servers. And so we did 2.9.3 to address both of those things. And unfortunately, when I was doing the release, I didn't tag the right version of the proxy, and I tagged the same version that we had already released with the bug in it. So we did 2.9.4 earlier this week, which includes the proxy update that we were supposed to do. It also includes a bunch of kind of base image updates and a couple CLI fixes here and there. But we're going to, if you want to upgrade from 2.8, especially to 2.10, you're going to be strongly recommended to go through 2.9, which will give you all of the safety features you need to do that without downtime or interruption. 2.9.4 specifically. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. We've had some conversations with folks in Slack who have done some leapfrog updates, and I think we haven't been explicit about when you do upgrade, it should be from a point version to a point version. So if you're starting from 2.7, you go to 2.8 and 2.9 and 2.10. And so you can derive from there where your start point and what the path should be to get to the endpoint. So I think I should probably create a doc issue for that and create a PR. Any questions from the community about Linkerd updates before we move on? William, any comments?
I have no further comment at this time. Linkerd is awesome. Sorry about 2.9.3. Wah wah.
Okay, great. Well, if there are no questions, I have a whole bunch of questions for last month's Linkerd hero, Richard. Richard's going to tell us about how he used the Linkerd await command, which I've seen another PR for just last night that we're starting to use it in Linkerd itself, which is pretty interesting. So first, Richard, welcome. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking the time. I know that it is late, or it's at least nearly dinner time, so we won't keep you too long. Please introduce yourself and teach me how to pronounce your last name properly.
Well, thank you for having me. So my last name is pronounced Pijnenberg.
Okay.
It's not that hard once you know it. When you read it, it's almost impossible to decipher it. So I'm a DevOps manager at FXC Intel, it's a fintech company here in London. It's now just past 5 o'clock, so it's not too late yet. Been working in IT for, well, about 18 odd years or so. And as you can see in the back, I'm a DJ in my free time as well.
What was your favorite music to play? I did not realize those. I thought those were servers actually. I didn't look closely enough.
It's mostly like EDM or house, or in other venues I play like a lot of lounge or deep house music.
Oh, we'll get you to play the music at the next community meetup. Now you're my
Sounds good.
personal hero in addition to the Linkerd hero.
Yeah.
We do need a soundtrack. That would be cool.
We do.
Just like in
I
the
like
background.
this.
Yeah.
Strictly public domain though.
That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, moving on, tell us about your history with open source. I know that you and I have talked about this, which is why I thought it was really helpful for you to tell other folks about it as well.
Yeah, so I've been involved with open source in one way or another for, well, better part of a decade now. Started using Puppet, the configuration management tool, years and years ago, and got involved with the community quite heavily, doing conferences and meetups. Also worked at Elasticsearch, which is an open source company as well. Also very heavily involved with the communities there and the development. And personally, I've always been a person of habit with just helping people, even if I have to spend some time myself on looking for the answer. It's always interesting for myself to know it as well, while I'm helping someone else. And it never hurts to take a couple of minutes of your time to support someone.
Well, that couldn't be better said, and that's definitely why you were the Linkerd hero last month. And we really appreciate it. Love having you as part of the community. How did you first get involved with open source? I mean, I know you said you worked with Puppet and Elasticsearch. Was it just that desire to help folks that got you into open source initially?
It's, well, primarily the use of it, and then asking questions if I run into some issues myself. And like I said, it's just a personal habit to share what I've learned to others, and just to help people. And also just an interest in technology in general, trying to learn.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that curiosity is what drives a lot of the folks who are involved in not only the Linkerd community, but in many open source communities. So what are you working on, and which particular requirements of that work made you try Linkerd?
So at where I work, we're redoing our entire infrastructure, and we're moving to Kubernetes to replace our legacy infra. And one of the requirements was to have full security internally in the cluster, to have that all the traffic encrypted, and then potentially do something like traffic splits or canary type of deployments. And the two that were very prominent was Istio initially, which I personally found horrific to set up. And looking for alternatives, I found Linkerd or Linkerd, and yeah, found it so much easier to use in general, especially for the features that are important in my case.
Right. So it was the mutual TLS that was the main thing for you?
Yeah.
And mutual TLS and ease of use?
Yeah, definitely.
Gotcha. So the reason that we brought you on today is because you had a question, or you actually just posted in Linkerd Slack that you were beginning to use the Linkerd await script. And so can you tell us about that from your perspective, and talk about what it was, the requirement, or what was going on in your environment that drove you to use that Linkerd await script?
Yeah, of course. So some of our applications are connection initiating programs instead of like a web server that just waits for requests. And because they launch pretty quickly, they'll try to initiate the connection, but the proxy sidecar isn't ready yet, which then fails the connection and destroys the container, which is pretty useless. So I needed something that would be able to check the status of the side proxy before my own main application would start running. So that's when I found Linkerd Await, which Oliver did post at some point in Slack a while ago, and I've remembered about it. Decided to try it out, and yeah, it works like a charm.
Awesome. So we'll make sure to put a link to the Oliver's repository for Linkerd Await. As I mentioned at the beginning, I saw a PR come through last night where we're now using Linkerd Await in the control plane components. So because we, and Oliver, you can probably expand on this if you want.
So as we move to Opaque Ports, we've been taking things out of the default port skip list. So that's things like 3306 and 443, all used to get no proxy. Proxy would ignore all that traffic. And so now we've changed that to be so that they all go through the proxy because we can support it. Now we don't want it to skip. But for a bunch of our control plane components, like the web UI, for instance, when it starts up, it builds a connection to the Kubernetes API, and that would immediately fail and go into some restart loop, and it was pretty annoying. So I was like, I've fixed this already. We should just use Linkerd Await. Little did I realize that I had to figure out how to do builds for our muscle static binary builds for ARM architectures and all that. So 8 hours later, I got it all working, and we got that into the thing. So actually, now Linkerd Await will support all the architectures that Linkerd supports, and we'll probably get it pulled into a proper Linkerd repo in the next month or two. But
awesome.
Yeah. And so the other thing is that, like, so Linkerd Await, basically what it does is it when it starts, it just it takes the rest of the command as its arguments, and it doesn't run them until the readiness check. It actually does the readiness check on the local Linkerd proxy until it succeeds. And then once that succeeds, it goes and execs or forks the actual process as you'd expect. We also added, I think probably about a month ago, the ability to do shutdown too. So for things like, there's another use case where if you're running cron jobs, for instance, and you want to inject them, that when those jobs complete, the proxy will just keep the pod around forever, which is really, really annoying. And there's no way to get the proxy to shut down after the job completes. And so Linkerd Await also has a shutdown flag, which will, when your process exits, it'll post a message to the Linkerd proxy locally and say, shut down now. So your jobs can complete gracefully. And so it's kind of filling in the gaps for what Kubernetes should be doing for us, but is not, because that RFC has been open for like 5 years and has not moved at all. So
yeah. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the RFC or the KEP that you're talking about is the sidecar KEP?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and so basically we want there to be a way in Kubernetes pod specs to say that, I mean, I think it's kind of gotten, the scope of that KEP has changed several times, but what we really wanted there just be, these containers need to start before and shouldn't be counted to keep the pod running. But they're shaving that yak in their own time.
Yeah. So you answered it during that. One of the questions that I had is, will Linkerd Await move out of your repositories and over into Linkerd? And so sounds like it will, which is cool.
Yep, though it's all the same in some level, but yeah, it's all open source. It's all the same license and it's all the same people. But yeah, I will move it out of Elixir into Linkerd at some point.
Gotcha. Well, and I was wondering how you actually pronounced Elixir, so now I know that too.
I also have always wondered that. Learning a lot.
So shifting. Yeah, well, that's what we're here for. We're teaching the community. We're educators. So shifting back to Richard, Before you found the Linkerd await script, was there anything else that you tried? And I ask this question as maybe a cautionary tale where you can instruct the community to just go straight to the Linkerd await script and help them to use their time efficiently and not lose time on something else.
Yeah, so other alternatives was a custom script, which is just horrific because will usually break at some point. A horrible sleep timer of just wait a couple of seconds. Or what I've done initially, especially with the cron jobs, because that is another use case for me that broke everything. And I think that's where the shutdown flag came from, is just not injected. Which is not a great solution. So I still need to redo the cron workloads that I have, but yeah.
Oh, to call the shutdown script?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so if you are running into similar issues, you have services that have connections that are starting connections before the proxy starts. Don't try to use timeout scripts. Don't try to use custom scripts. Use Linkerd await. That's the takeaway that I'm getting at. Got it. Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that worked for you. So taking a step back from the Linkerd await part, what advice do you have for folks who are getting started with Linkerd or even open source projects as a whole?
In general, for me, it's always been just getting involved, even just reading what's happening on Slack. I've learned so much with what other people are having issues with certain things. I probably will hit a similar thing down the line at some point. So already sort of know in the back of my mind that someone talked about it. Just watching the videos that people bring out, conference talks that have been recorded. Yeah, mostly just being there, just soaking up all the information and asking questions. I think that's a great start for anyone to start learning about the product itself or the software and learning about the community around it.
For the open source project that you've gotten involved with, it sounds to me like it was driven by curiosity and technology, but also just as part of the work that you've been doing, like the role that you have. Is that true, or are there other?
Yes, it's usually been kickstarted by using the software or finding a need to use it or something else. It's not that I randomly go out and find a piece of software to get involved with.
Well, as we've discussed, you are up at some very late hours. And so it wouldn't surprise me if you're scrolling through GitHub looking for repositories and things to work on.
Sometimes I do if I find it if I find the time for it.
Awesome. Okay, so you've used Linkerd for how long now?
This about 3 or 4 months ish.
Okay, great. And so if you could contribute to one feature to Linkerd tomorrow, what would it be?
Oh, that's a difficult choice because I actually have written up 2.
Oh yeah, give us, I mean, as many as you've got.
Okay. Well, the first one is the certificate management because there's so many. So certificates are always a hard thing to do for most people, and getting that really documented well with the steps and the integration with existing tools like Cert Manager. That's something I would love to do. So that because some other people hit issues that they ran it for a while and then suddenly the cert wouldn't be valid anymore. So that's one, and the second one would be the opaque ports, well, which will come soon. But initially, it was sort of the skip ports for a lot of the services. I had to add manually a lot of them for the services I use, and there's no documented list of these are all the problematic services, or adding them to the default list, for example. Which we could do for the whole opaque list, for example, and have some way of the community adding new ports to it as well.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I should also note in 2.10, we've relaxed a bunch of the protocol detection timeout stuff, especially on the outbound side. So on the inbound side, we still time things out, but on the outbound side, we'll add like 10 seconds of latency to things, but we'll fail open and let things kind of go through after that. So
okay,
we're trying to make it less painful. We're aware that it hurts.
Yeah, so those are two pretty, I think, crucial features that you would want to work on, or that you would make better tomorrow if you could. The cert manager piece, I think I know the PR that you're talking about, or the issue that you're talking about, where when the certificates are rotated, there's like a gap in time where they can, the certificates can be invalid. And I thought that there was a fix that went in for that, but a documentation fix, but I may be thinking of a different PR. The second piece, the configuring the skip ports or the opaque ports, I think for a long time we've been trying to come up with a definitive list or master list of these, a definitive list of these ports that need to be skipped or need to be made opaque now. And it seems like there's always a new one that comes up that is somewhat obscure. I think recently somebody was working with MariaDB Galera, which uses, I think, 4444 or something like that. So that's that. I feel like could continue to be an ongoing list, but again, something that would be helpful for us to have for the community. So I appreciate that. So those are all the questions that I had for you. Do you have any other thoughts? Anything else you want to share with the community or add, or yeah, give us your brain dump.
No, I just find it a very great community, very open. Everybody's happy to talk about things, and all the feedback is appreciated, which is very nice to see with these open source communities. Yeah, and Linkerd is so easy to use, so that I think that's one of the biggest selling points in that perspective for people to use, that you can deploy it super easy and get going with it without much pain. So yeah, keep it up. That's all.
Cool. We like to hear that. And before we let you go, then I will open it up to folks who are here on the call if they want to ask you any questions. Anybody? You can ask your question in chat, or we can unmute you for a sec as well. If not, we will move on. Okay, let's move on. Well, thank you, Richard. Thank you for helping so much in Slack. I almost feel like we are teaming up to help people and answer questions, and your knowledge has been indispensable. So we really appreciate it, and it proves why you are the Linkerd hero. So yeah, thank you. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, let's move on and talk about protocol detection. We spoke briefly about opaque ports and skip ports. These may be terms that are, well, they're definitely terms that are specific to Linkerd. And so I have a blog post that we're going to post, or we're going to publish shortly after this, but I want to give you a little bit of preview into it and talk about protocol detection in general, why it exists, or what it is, why it exists, and how opaque ports came to evolve as a result from skip ports and as part of the proxy as a result of that. So next slide, please. So protocol detection is the ability of the proxy to determine which protocol a connection is using by peeking at the bytes of the request, or of the connection, I should say. And Oliver, please jump in if I miss something or misstate something. Want to make sure that we're very clear about this. So I've been spending some time diving on this to make sure that I fully understand it, but I also want to make sure that I communicate clearly everything to the community, and the blog post will do that in written form. This is us just talking about it right now. So when two Linkerd proxies are talking to each other, or even when Linkerd proxy receives a request, it has logic in it to look at the first few bytes and look at the metadata of the connection to try and figure out what the protocol is of that request, so that it can figure out, or so that it can then pass the request on properly. And so the first thing that it does is try to figure out if the protocol is HTTP. And if not, it checks to see if it's TLS client hello. And there are a couple of, and this is for inbound connections, and there are a couple of things that can happen in those cases. For HTTP, if it's an inbound connection, Linkerd the proxy will pass it through to the underlying service. For outbound requests, the proxy will look at the HTTP traffic, try and determine if it's HTTP1 or HTTP2. And I believe we're still doing transparent upgrades. Is that right, Oliver?
Yeah. So I can, there's a little color there, but you're basically right. On the inbound side, we actually always do TLS first. Okay. Because all proxy to proxy communication is going to be TLS. And so we always want to do TLS first, and then we look and say, okay, once we've decrypted this, is this HTTP in here? And that's actually a big part of the protocol upgrading, is that we do everything between proxies that's HTTP over HTTP2 and TLS. And then, so if your application is doing HTTP1 to the proxy, we'll do HTTP2 and MTLS between the proxies. And then on either side, we'll upgrade and downgrade that back to HTTP1.
Gotcha.
And also on the outbound side, before we do any sorts of detection, we always do we almost always do service discovery, right? And so there's, as you initiate an outbound connection, we know the target IP address you're talking to and the target port, and we go to the service discovery and we say, hey, do you know anything about the service I'm talking to? Is it a pod? Is it a service? Is it opaque? What do you know about it? And it comes back and it says, well, this is not an opaque port. So this workload you're talking to isn't marked as opaque. So go ahead and do HTTP detection. And then if it's a service, we'll go do discovery for load balancing, or if it's just a pod, we'll just forward it directly without. And so that's all changed, I think, primarily in 2.9. Before in 2.8, we used to do per request logic for a lot of this. 2.9, we changed this to be per connection. So we do a discovery on the connection level metadata. And now with 2.10, we're using this kind of extended to this MTLS functionality in particular is used for the gateway. So if you're doing multi-cluster gateways, that gateway listens on its, on its proxy port, and when it gets connections directly to the proxy port, it'll try to read extra protocol metadata, because we do ALPN negotiations and fancy stuff in there. But yeah, it's gotten more sophisticated over the past 6 months or so. It was a lot more simple in 2.8, but.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And as you can see, I'm still learning about it as well, and
it keeps changing, so it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, and so the sophistication here is what we're really focusing on, because there were folks in Linkerd Slack, and also some questions that came in through GitHub where there were questions about protocol detection and how it works, and what, to Richard's points about which protocols should be skipped or in the future be made opaque. And so our goal here is to make sure that this very sophisticated and complex logic is easy to consume when you're using Linkerd in practice.
Yeah, and so the backstory here is that we want to be able to add HTTP level request load balancing We want to be able to know about status codes and give you all the metrics and service profiles and things that you depend on there. And we want to give that all out of the box. And so we don't want to have you have to configure to say, these are all the HTTP ports in my cluster, because chances are it's most of them. And so we kind of assume it's HTTP, and we try to treat things as HTTP unless we look at it and like, this doesn't look at anything like HTTP, in which case we just forward it through. And so we always do one, and actually after 2.9, but before 2.10, early in the release process, I try to improve HTTP detection by making it more robust, and it would read up to a new line. And that started causing all sorts of pain for folks who were hitting detection timeouts like way more than they were before. And so we actually went back to the old way. We do a single read, and if there's enough data in there to tell us it's HTTP, we treat it as HTTP, and if not, well, we just forward it through as opaque. And I guess the other bit of context there, sorry that I keep ranting, is that we used to really bias, like we want this to make sure it's HTTP because we would only do MTLS for HTTP communication. And now that we can do load balancing, traffic split, and multi-cluster gateways, and we can do all of this for non-HTTP communication, the failure mode of not catching something that's actually HTTP and just treating it as TCP means we'll lose metrics on it, but we'll continue to proxy it properly with security and eventually policy. And so we've kind of repositioned it to be much like before HTTP was kind of required for a lot of functionality. Now that it's not, we try to be a lot more graceful in terms of failing open and letting things through.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm glad that you reminded me that the protocol detection, the focus of the blog post talks about how protocol detection kind of sets the foundation for the features that Linkerd offers, like observability, like the security, and the reliability through load balancing, which are the core concepts of Linkerd. And so by detecting the protocol, we can, Linkerd, the proxy can figure out what level of metrics it can capture. So for TCP level metrics, we're limited to just capturing the bytes read, bytes written, and the TCP connections. And so what Oliver was just talking about there is we don't want to, previously we didn't want to mistake an HTTP connection for a TCP connection for lack of losing the metrics. But going forward, in order to make sure the traffic continues to flow and that the connections all remain stable, we will sacrifice the HTTP metrics and collect those TCP metrics just to make sure that the application runs and we don't get these fail fast errors that we saw in some of the previous versions. That's what I'm hearing there. For the security piece, we talked about how Linkerd will first look to see if the traffic is TLS, if it's a TLS client hello. And one of the things that I gathered while I was researching this is that we do, Linkerd will determine if an inbound TLS connection is coming from another Linkerd proxy, which means it's a request that's within the mesh, by looking at either the host or the authority headers. And if the host or authority header is for the proxy, then Linkerd will then know, the proxy will then know that it can decrypt the traffic and then pass it on to the underlying service. Whereas if the proxy is not the host or the authority, then the proxy will continue to pass that TLS traffic through.
Yeah, slightly different terminology, but yeah,
Okay.
In TLS, there's this field called SNI, or extension called SNI, which is server name identification. And so what we do is we have, every proxy has an identity string, which isn't really a host name. It's based on the service account. So all identity in Linkerd is tied to the service account, because that's what we use. That's the token that's available in the pod that we use to authenticate to the identity service that gives us back our certificate. And so there's this like long name that's like service account .linkerd .whatever. And that name, every proxy knows it's an identity. And so when a TLS connection comes in with an SNI value that matches that expected name, we're like, okay, this is for me. I know how to decrypt this, and we decrypt it. And otherwise, we say, oh, this is for like example.com. It's not me. Well, we can add that to the metrics and say, hey, this is TLS for example.com, but we just pass it through because we can't decrypt it. So we just, yeah, we're totally transparent as far as TLS goes.
Gotcha. And I think it's important to mention that the mutual TLS that occurs that is using those service accounts also validates, not only does it allow for the encryption and decryption of the traffic between the proxies, but it validates that the proxy that is sending the request and the proxy that is receiving the request are the proxies that they said they've been issued certificates from the identity service. And so we're enforcing security at the validation level as well, so that nobody can be, or no other service can be, I guess, faking that they are a proxy.
That's right. And really, again, it's about that, knowing the service account of the workloads. And so we at the end of the day, if you run Linkerd edges, you'll see the service accounts that are communicating between each other for the most part. And that's really going to be the underpinning for policy of like authorization of who can talk to what, and all of that kind of security focused functionality. So we've really been focused on making MTLS ubiquitous across clusters, et cetera, so that we have that in place before we try to start tackling policy and thinking about how we add access controls and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's what's planned for 2.11.
That's a great segue into the next slide. So we're talking about how protocol detection has become more robust as over the last 6 months. And so initially we had the skip ports annotation. So we've talked about how when you configure skip ports for a proxy, for inbound and outbound, the proxy doesn't even, the IP table rules are written in such a way that the traffic is just sent directly between the two services themselves on that port. I know that MySQL is probably the classic example of this, including the server speaks first protocols. And so when we do this skip ports, the proxy can't collect any metrics. This was, I don't know if it was a workaround or if it was just to, I don't know, would you call it a workaround, or is it more of just a way to configure the proxies so that they don't try to do anything with the traffic?
Yeah, and this I think is one of the earliest, in the first version of Conduit, since the very beginning of doing protocol detection, we've had to do this to support things that the proxy couldn't natively handle. And like I said, a lot of the functionality required HTTP originally. So we basically had a special case everything that wasn't, say, don't proxy it if the proxy won't work. And over time, we've tried to encompass more and more of the traffic so that we can start to tackle policy and things like that in a comprehensive way.
And so that brings us to 2.10. In the next slide, we've got opaque ports, where the difference is the proxy will still, when we configure an opaque port, first of all, you'll notice that you don't configure an inbound and an outbound port. You configure one port, and whether that traffic is inbound or outbound, the proxy will know that it should handle it, but it should skip the protocol detection.
And a little correction there. It's really only configures inbound. And so you set it on the workloads, even if they're not matched, you can set this on workloads. And then any proxy that's trying to talk to that workload will discover that annotation and say, oh, this thing I'm talking to has an opaque annotation here, so I won't do any protocol detection before I go forward. And that's why we do this protocol, the service discovery before we do any detection in the outbound side.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that correction. So this is the evolution of the configurations for handling TCP traffics so that we can now do MTLS on all TCP traffic, which I think is a big step forward in Linkerd, which is why it was probably a banner feature release or the headline feature release in 2.9. TLS for TCP was the headline feature release for 2.9. Opaque Ports is the feature release for 2.10. So I certainly didn't mean to pull you in to answer all these questions, but I appreciate you clarifying again so that the community gets the right information. So I will be posting the blog later today, and we'll send a link out, put announcements in to Linkerd Slack and Discord. So with that, I think we do need a book from Oliver. That's right, Sergio. Sergio says we need a book from Oliver in the chat. So, okay. Thanks for helping that out.
It's already stale.
It's already stale. Okay, so that is very high level protocol detection. When you read the blog post, I think things will be much clearer and you'll be able to go through and read through like the actual processing of a request as it goes through. So that also is like the evolution of the, I guess, the robustness of handling TCP traffic that sets us up for fully supporting mutual TLS for TCP. And then, as Oliver mentioned in 2.11, being able to manage policy between traffic policy between services and pods. So that's all I have to say about that. I think we can move on to our Linkerd hero. And we're going to leave that to Jason to handle that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So Linkerd hero. So trying to award every month, right, as someone from the community for their outstanding work with code contributions, community contributions, or content. So this month we had Sergio Mendez, who is really helping to build kind of the next generation of Linkerd adopters. NJM, or a person who goes by NJM and prefer to remain anonymous, for all their great help in the community Slack, as well as Piyush, who has done a lot to contribute code. So I want to thank everyone for their work. We really appreciate it. And this month we have, come on button, we have Sergio. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for everything you did. We're really very grateful.
That's really nice. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Congrats, Sergio.
Yeah, congratulations. Thanks for.
That's really nice, really nice. Yeah, I think that, well, I don't consider myself like a coding contributor. It's a little bit different, like the description said in the blog. So yeah, just trying to teach to the students new things about using Linkerd. Yeah, so we are exploring and testing a lot of things in the university. Yeah, this is really nice. Thank you very much.
What does
Yeah, thank
Sergio
you.
get? Does he get, is there like a cash prize or
Nah,
autographed copy of the source code?
don't worry. No, it's really nice, really nice. Yeah.
Accolades
Congratulations,
and
my friend
praise.
Sergio.
Yeah, maybe I can talk something or next plan in the university. I am well, I have two ideas that are a little bit crazy. So one idea, well, right now our next project in the university is to use Linkerd to explore the chaos engineering and to create a project just to exploring chaos engineering with Linkerd and Chaos Mesh and see what happens with that part. Is the coming thing that we are doing right now. And we are also working in a thesis with a student that is exploring that part about chaos engineering with Linkerd in a specific. So yeah, it's the next thing that is coming right now.
Yeah, that sounds
really
fantastic.
I really like to use the pure, well, I mean the proxy side. I think I remember that you wrote the proxy using Rust language. So I really want to explore that part. Maybe I can explain the service mesh more in depth using that component. I am curious about that, how in depth it works, the service mesh. So maybe I want to try to include that part in my course. So yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, that's you and I chatted about that a little bit, Sergio, and the chaos engineering piece is interesting. There's a way to configure Linkerd traffic splits to do failure or to inject failures. So maybe that'll be helpful to you. So you and I can keep chatting about that, and maybe we can put together some a blog post or something interesting that will, again, help the community and provide some information. So thanks again. Congratulations. And yeah, we'll see you in Slack and Discord.
Yeah, sure. Send me the invite to this Discord. Yeah.
You got it. Okay, so there was a question in the chat. So this is perfect because it's the Q&A question time. I'll just read it through. Oliver answered it in the Slack or the chat. It says, with TCP TLS, is it part of long-term goal to proxify traffic also between applications, database pods, and/or application and other third-party infrastructure, like for instance, virtual HSM, which I believe is a hardware security module. So,
yeah, I can say what I said. So yeah, for now, I mean, I think ultimately, yes, the kind of order of things is, one, we want to get to a place where we require TLS on all traffic in a cluster. And so that would be on your ingress, that we're requiring that everything coming into your ingress has TLS, even if we're not decrypting it in the proxy. And as you go out of the cluster, that everything leaving the cluster has TLS, even though the proxy is not doing anything for it. But because we're in the data path, we can at least validate that it's using TLS and fail it if it's not, potentially. And then, so like that would be a really nice milestone for us to hit. We've been talking about that for over a year now, too long, but it's a little bit complicated, especially as we deal with things like health checking and readiness probes and things like that. And then I think there's, as I said, there's a lot of interest in doing, like, how do we integrate with non-Kubernetes resources? So external databases or VMs or whatever. And we haven't gotten too deep into the design of that, but I would love it if we can basically imagine these things that are not Kubernetes clusters as other Kubernetes clusters or other Linkerd clusters. And the gateway things we've been doing, especially for TCP multi-cluster, really provide, I think, the core of that. And then it's really around how do we package that and get it deployed. And it's a lot more of the kind of less data plane work and more install and lifecycle management stuff that we have to think about. But yeah, I think there's a lot of interest there. So if that's a thing you have ideas about or a stake in or requirements, just start writing that down in an issue or something, and we can help work through it.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Any other questions? We've got just a few minutes left. Here's another question from Tans. Does Linkerd have anything like self-contained JOT or Oauth access token validation? So I believe that this is what we're working towards in 2.11. Is that right, Oliver?
Nope.
Nope, not at all.
No, so we don't have any kind of pluggable logic around request headers or anything like that yet. I think in some ways we're working towards that. Like we want to revamp the policy infrastructure. And so I don't think 2.11 is going to enable that, but we do want to start to deprecate the existing service profile CRDs and start to think through something that's a little bit more flexible going forward. But that I think ultimately requires proxy changes and really the ability to plug in arbitrary validation logic into the proxy. So that's something we've been thinking about, and I think WASM is a really interesting technology that might help us accomplish that. But we're evaluating it, but we're not like rushing on implementation yet. So it's not a never, it's just a not yet.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Problem is that everything is okay. Yeah. So Tans is saying that it would be great if we could do this, and I think this is the auth Z or auth N issue that comes up pretty frequently as well, and we currently suggest that folks do that at the ingress level, which is what Tans is talking about there. William says another answer to Rodrigo's question about what channels to subscribe to beyond Twitter and the announcement channel on Slack. There's an RSS feed for the blog, so that link is in the chat as well.
I don't think we've ever like published that. It's just like an artifact of what Hugo does. So I had to like rebuild the site locally to even find out what that thing was. But yeah, linkerd.io/blog/feed.xml will give you an RSS feed.
Sweet. Add it to your RSS readers. Okay. If there are no other questions, we're finishing right on time today. So that's great. Really want to appreciate everybody for coming. Oh yeah. Let's Jason, do you wanna read us out?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming. You all probably already know because you're here, but Linkerd is an open source project to give you a service mesh. It's been in production for a while. We've got lots of Slack channel members and we're always looking for more. And of course, Discord as well. We appreciate those GitHub stars and contributions. And for one more,
Tell your friends and family.
yeah, tell
right.
everybody and join our community. Whether it's we're gonna add the Discord stuff as soon as we get it to the slide. Love to see you on GitHub, on Slack, and on Twitter.
Great. All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for your time. Oliver, thanks for your input. Richard, much appreciated. Oh, there you are. And then Sergio, congratulations. So have a great rest of your week, everybody, rest of your day, and we will see you in about a month, but not before we see you on Slack. So,
Okay.
And Discord.
Yeah.
Yeah, great to see everyone.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Take care.
Bye.